Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Monica, and I'm joined by my co host, Scott. And today we're really excited to be joined by Mark Rushton, CEO of Comet. Mark brings a really interesting perspective on how organizations are thinking about data, not just what they're measuring, but how they're actually using that data to make better decisions. And before we jump in, just to level set for those folks who are not familiar with any of this stuff, which I'm throwing myself in there, when we talk about EHSQ or QHSC data, depending on what side of the pond you're on, we're talking about the data organizations collect around quality, health, safety, and environmental performance. So think of things like your incidents, your audits, your inspections, and then the near misses. So the reality is that most organizations actually do have a lot of this data, but the bigger question is what they're really doing with it. So in today's episode, we're going to be zooming out a little bit and talking about how HSQE data has evolved, why expectations from leadership are changing, and where there's still a gap between having data and actually having real value from it. Hello, Mark. It is so good to have you on the pod today. Thank you for joining us. Do you want to just take a moment to introduce yourself, and Scott as well? Feel free to jump in at any point.
Fantastic to meet you, Scott. Great to see you again. Yeah, delighted to be here. Mark Rushton, CEO at Comet, and for a long time now, someone who has been intensely curious about what organizations are doing with all that stuff that they've been gathering for years and years, and often organizing and storing very well in wonderful systems like Intellex, and now we're becoming more increasingly curious themselves about how they might unlock some of that value and some of that hidden insight that might just be lurking inside it. So looking forward to the debate this afternoon.
Yeah, and I'm Scott Gaddis. I am Vice President of Safety and Health here at Intellex, and I've been in the practice of EHS for nearly 4 decades, and things are changing around me daily, it seems. So I'm looking forward to this podcast.
Lovely. Me too. So, the first topic that I wanted to jump into was around data explosion. So, Mark, start at a high level. QHSC data is more accessible now than ever. What has changed over the last few years to get us here?
Great question, and you're absolutely right. Explosion is probably the right word. And it's not an explosion born out of just new technology. We've been gathering and storing and organizing this data for an awful long time now. 5, 10 years of rich data is not uncommon in most semi-mature organizations that take their quality, their health, and their safety seriously. In your world many of them because organizations that buy Intellex already have made a decision to take this stuff seriously. I think the big explosions come in the ability of, I suppose, technology to help unlock what's hiding inside all of those repositories, and not just to unlock it, but to put it in order and understand how to mine for some of the very specific things that data might be holding, that might give organizations the chance to be a little bit more decision centric, based on the strength of signal that their data is giving them about maybe something they need to invest in, or perhaps something that they don't. So I think that the explosions come not just in the fact that we now have more data because we've been collecting lots of it for a long time. It's much more around now having the ability to unlock what's held inside it.
Yeah, I would add to that. So, Mark, I totally agree with you. I think when I started practice nearly 40 years ago, we were just okay with data, regardless to where it came from, how it was
Yeah.
presented, right? And much of it was lagging data, and we were satisfied with that. I think now the real fight today is making sense of all of this data that we have. And I can look back at Intellex probably 10 years ago and said we had most of our customers had just simply wanted to collect data, right? And what I noticed when I was leading companies for environmental health and safety is that leadership, right, has started to notice what data driven decision making looks like, and they've learned it from finance and from operations and
Yeah.
supply chain. Now they're expecting EHS to do much of the same, right? They are expecting EHS to play at that same level, and I don't think that's a threat. I think it's an invitation. But the practitioners, really need to step up, right? Really need to really understand that we have a place at that table if we want it, but we're going to have to think maybe a little bit more business minded. And I think that that's where technology really helps because it fundamentally changed not only the accessibility to data, but we've been able to pull it out of spreadsheets and siloed system, and now we can centralize it, we can structure it, we can report it in real time. So the accessibility, right, has really made things happen differently. I can even see it in the last 2 or 3 years than the previous 20, years.
100%. And your example around the comparison to operations, I think, is really, really important. If you think in the world of ERP
Yep.
and operations, typically the currency within those systems is cash. Those things are directly money related. They're related to efficiency and profitability and operations and project delivery. The currency inside an EHS management system is data. That's its currency. And so why can't we unlock it in the same way as we unlock
Yes.
the cash savings
Mhm.
that can be retrieved from well-managed operations and operations technology? So I completely agree. I completely agree. And of course, we now have this thing in our world, don't we, that's very mature called data science. The ability to create models and organize the data in such a way that it can be actually pointed towards giving you things that you couldn't get before. So you're right. There's a,
Absolutely.
there's a huge
Yeah.
opportunity to unlock all of that effort of the past decade in particular and really start to use it to make decisions. And I've got this kind of saying we have in our world that counting, but does it count? And I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting way of framing some of this stuff up, because for me, numbers don't really cut it anymore. I
Mhm.
don't really look at numerical data now and think, wow, that's telling me something really earth-shattering that I can go and make a decision on. Okay, I've had 10 of them and 15 of them, but so what? I want the color, I want the detail, I want
Yeah.
the descriptors, I want to understand the context so I can make a decision. And I think that's where the technology is becoming much, much more of an enabler.
Agreed, agreed. So, with all this data now available, though, how do you think expectations from leadership have changed when it comes to this performance? Would you say the leaders are asking better questions? Would you say they're overwhelmed? They don't really know what to do with the data? What do you think?
I think there's two camps. I think there are still leaders out there that expect you can just throw this stuff over the fence and you'll get better answers. And they're still on that kind of learning journey to understand what needs to be right in order to get the right kind of insights. But the switched on ones are definitely now being more demanding of the exploitation of all that effort that's gone on in the past, and quite rightly so. We should be as EHS leaders much, much more confident about making more informed decisions if we use the data at our disposal more effectively. The fact is, that every organization in the world that we've ever come across, and I'm sure you've ever come across, will have a smaller percentage of its bad actors that give it disproportionately more pain than all the others. And
Mhm.
so using this type of analytics to identify and isolate what those things are and understand their behaviors and their habits and do more work to mitigate them will definitely result in more sustained performance uplift. So I think that the informed ones are quite rightly being much, much more demanding of what their expectations around this genre should be. And I think quite rightly so.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. And I predicted that we would not disagree much on anything, for this podcast, because I always look at things as a practitioner first. And I have sat through, I don't know how many executive reviews with boards on senior leadership teams. And the headline number is always one thing: it's an injury rate. And if it
Yeah,
was down, everyone excelled and they moved on, right?
yeah,
A low lagging indicator, it meant something different to that group than it did to me. What it told me is that, well, we were measuring things that had already happened in the system, and building strategy for lagging data alone was always a look back into the system. And I would say, I would preface that by saying, I think it's always important to look back. I'm all right with that. But over reliance and presenting information to an executive team that does not grow them in a different way, I think it just really hampers us as what the practice of EHS requires us to do today, or even quality. So it has been one that it felt like pushing a rope, at times, but I think it's
Yep.
changing. And I think it is. I think it kind of goes back to my first comment is that we've learned a lot through operational effectiveness, through how finance is reporting, their information now. So we're seeing strategy change, and we're even seeing, our own clients really ask, right, to help them have a more balanced measurement portfolio so they can have conversations with executive leadership teams. So the goal is, I think, for us, always forward looking of
Yep.
where risk is actually building. And some of that is looking backwards, but much of it is actually looking forward into the system.
Yeah, I agree. I violently agree, and that's interesting. And let me pick on your core profession a little bit for a second, Scott, because this is maybe a little bit unfair, but historically, EHS professionals have been very good at beating themselves up about the things that don't
Yeah.
go right. But to your point, haven't spent nearly as much time in understanding the signs of things that do go right. And my kind of epiphany in this field was about 5 years ago now. I got exposed to an assurance data set. It was a data set around, it was about 28,000 interventions across a number of years across a large energy company. And anyway, analysis of this data showed compliance rates in excess of 95%. And then even where there was non-compliance, the sliver of activity that was more extreme non-compliance was only about 10% of the 5%. So it was really,
Yeah.
really small. And the first thing I turned around and said was, have you done any analysis of all these times you get it right? And of course, this is now
That's
called
right.
HOP and all the other things that come with
Yeah.
it. But again, it was like, well, no, there's an assumption we're just good at what we do. And you think, well, no, but there's things in here that are telling you why you're good at what you do. Let's spend a little bit more time looking at that. And that spawned a really exciting kind of caveat within the technology now, which I really like, which is agentic AI, where you can train agents to look for very specific things like compliance to a particular standard, and that can be worth its weight in gold because it can tell an organization what they're doing right and how to do more of it. In other words, get on the front foot. To Scott's point, use
Yeah.
those leading indicators to reinforce the good. There was a project we got involved in with a research body a couple of years ago where we looked at compliance to a rail standard called RM3, which is a risk compliance score for the rail industry. And it was incredible because when you applied a data set to it, you could train that agent to go and look for compliance in that specific standard. And that's great because it identifies gaps before they become consequential, but it also allows you then to get on the front foot and look at what's really, really good. So you're right, Scott. There are
Yeah.
lots and lots of ways we should be looking at getting ahead of this before we're looking back at maybe a statistic, which is quite a blunt instrument to be frank, and over the piece doesn't change massively if we look at serious injuries in particular. So yeah, I'm totally in that camp.
Agreed. Well, in the spirit of talking about indicators, we did talk about leading indicators, but I also wanted to talk about lagging indicators,
Yeah.
which is still something that dominates. Why do you think that organizations still rely so heavily on these? Is it because they're easy to report? What gets missed? Any insight do you have?
Yikes! How political do you want me to be? There's
It's
there's a bunch of reasons around kind of TRIR and lagging indicators, and some of it, is slightly worrying in that it's not uncommon still to find industries where bonuses, etc., are delivered based on that particular statistic, and as a result of that, you get things that aren't reported properly. You get LTIs reduced to RWECs, and you get laptops being sent into hospital wards and all sorts of
Right.
things. But luckily, that's changing. There's not so much of that anymore. I think it's an easy statistic to take a view on, and I think sometimes those that aren't involved in the profession, maybe CFOs, CEOs, COOs, they maybe can understand that quite quickly. And to Scott's point earlier, when it goes up, they know it's bad, and when they go down, they perceive it to be good. But there is so much more color to be unlocked from looking at a far broader portfolio of information that QHSE or EHSQ provides. And I think that's maybe where the smarter money is starting to go. It's just the simplicity of it. I think the bluntness of it almost is one of its appeals. But yeah, we're finding now that less and less switched on organizations are accepting that as a primary metric, not least because it doesn't tell you very much, which is ultimately the key. It's not the number that matters; it's the why that sits behind the number that really matters. And if we can get into metrics that unlock that why, then that's much more interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that if I look back, this started in the 1970s when OSHA produced what they called the OSHA recordable, right? And they defined it, and then they had senior leaders they started understanding what that number meant or what they thought it meant. And they have literally been trained decade over decade over decade that that was the measurement of success for an organization. And it's been very difficult to turn back time, right? For practitioners talking with a leadership group that has fervently defended that number because it seems easy, but it doesn't tell us enough. And it's exactly what Mark said. It's not the why. There's no why behind that number unless you're looking back at failure. And when I think about that, and Mark, this kind of spawned a thought when you were talking on your last comment about the time I'm in front of the board. I'm talking about our recordable incident rate. Their thumbs up or their thumbs down, and I was talking about a specific facility that had it was a good total incident rate, but what their workers' compensation, what their workplace medical costs demonstrated that they were by far the most solid member, the most solid facility that I had in the entire corporation. So they were controlling not only right recordable incidents, but they were controlling medical costs, which to me is many times how I define, if I'm looking at trailing indicators, how I define success with a facility. But it was a difficult conversation, right? It was very difficult to have a conversation outside of that one siloed metric that they were locked in on. And that's what we have to overcome, Monica, when we talk about this, is that an over reliance, regardless of what that lagging indicator is, it's an industry-wide problem. And it's one that, with folks like us at Comet and Intellects, we're trying to break that. We're trying to have that conversation that it is more balanced. And I'm okay with understanding lagging indicators. I think it's important. I think I'm very okay with understanding those leading indicators and blending that story together so you can have the conversation. And for me, that's the most important part that I have in all of this, is to be able to have an intelligent conversation about where we need to go.
I think what I'm hearing, and keep me honest, is in order to have those intelligent conversations, you're going to have to take one step back and have the dashboards and the insights that actually provide you with that information. So, do you think that these dashboards typically fall short? And what does good actually kind of look like here?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the beauty of how you report what it is you seek to report is that that's very simple now. The visual
Yeah.
interpretation of what people see and read now can be very, very compelling. So it's unusual to find well constructed dashboards that don't tell a better story than maybe what was previously possible.
Mhm.
I think I think you're right on the kind of step back thing. What is it that's going to add value, and how do we need to consume that information to be on the front foot? And there's a couple of things I suppose come into play here. One is around, at what point does data become actionable? At what point are we confident enough in it that we're going to be able to go and make a better decision because of it? And that's often not a decision about spending money or time or resource. It's sometimes helping you make a decision about where not to spend money, time, and resource. I think the overarching theme behind this discipline is that there's not an organization in the world that has an infinite budget to keep itself and its people out of harm's way. It's
Yeah.
got to know where to put things and where not to put things. And I'm
Mhm.
going to bring the P word in a little bit here, but I'm going to use a small p. But prediction is, of course, the kind of holy grail
Mhm.
of a metric-led output. Can we get to a point where we can predict when our next failure or where our highest risk lies? And I've always felt the kind of tools that talk about telling you that you're going to have an incident in stairwell 13 on 2 p.m. on Friday in damp conditions is dangerous. I don't think that level of prediction is necessarily possible
Right.
or healthy. But I
Mhm.
do think that if you get this stuff right and you use those leading indicators properly and you challenge yourself beyond looking for numbers, then prediction with a small p should become very possible, where we can start to say, well, actually, the systemic risk is lying here. This is the particular type of operation. This is the particular type of client or project or location or geography, whatever it might be, where we've got a bigger risk. And that's born out of all the lagging and leading indicators that we've got at our disposal. But typically, that type of insight doesn't come from looking at numbers. It comes from looking at all the things that are driving the numbers. So if, for example, we're looking at what barriers within our safe system of work were effective or failed or missing, it's no good to tell me I've got 10, 5, and 4. I need to know what they were. I need to know where they were. I need to know the conditions around them. I need to know potentially if there was human error associated with them and what that human error was telling me. All those things become important. And really the role in technology here is to bring all that to the fore and organize it and structure it in such a way as we can interpret the results quickly and clearly. And that's still not easy because in large organizations, we're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of records and getting those real insights within those records to a point that we can have that color that we need.
Yeah, I think, and it's one of the wonderful things about our relationship with Comet is when I look at data, right, presented in front of me, whether it's leading or lagging, I think genuine insight requires interrogating that data point, right? We got to be willing to say,
Yeah.
well, that number looks fine, but what's hiding up underneath that number? And I'm writing right now about how senior leaders should act in the workplace, and it's a lot around this topic. Is that I find a lot of senior leaders, they'll look at a dashboard, red, yellow, green, full of needle gauges, and they won't respond to green. And that's kind of a lean mechanism, right? Is don't respond to green, only respond to what you see red or yellow. And those are the things that you start questioning. I would challenge that. I want you to also question, why am I seeing green? What's changed in our system? And of course then challenge yellow and red as you see those things. But I think that the most benefit that we have as a leadership team, as practitioners, is to interrogate the data that we're seeing in front of us. And Comet, this is your bread and butter, right? Is that we've got causal factors, we've got root causes, we've got system features that all need to be talked about. And that comes through, I think, through conversation and through development of a skill that we just don't have today. So that's a practitioner skill. And I think it's one that our profession really needs to own very, very aggressively. I think Mark says something because I also use prediction with a little p. In my mind, it's always a little p. And it's very difficult for me to even talk about prediction and what I do as a practitioner because the biggest variable I believe in the workplace is a person, right? And trying
Correct.
to track that person and exactly what that person is going to do and the environment that they're going to be doing it in is very difficult. I look at it almost more like prescription. Can you give me two or three things that get me down into this funnel of things that are probable, right? But I'm in the seat as a professional, right? So I've got a gut. I can see things with my eyes in front of me and things change. I think, Mark, it's exactly what you said. Weather changes. It's too dark, right? It's too light. All of those things do matter. So helping me get to an answer is more important to me right now than giving me that answer that I'm going to maybe question a little bit more. And I think that there is a shift happening. There is a shift of giving us better insight that is real and meaningful. I think dashboards answer the what in many cases, but we really have to be a part of the why to understand what's next, in the work system.
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good point about the small p. Do you guys think that we should be utilizing AI to help us do better predictions and help prevent some of this and provide that insight that data sometimes can overlook?
100%. It's not a case in most forward-thinking businesses now about if, it's a question of when, if not now.
Mhm.
And we're fortunate in this profession actually because EHS data typically is benign and it's stuff that we can benefit as industries from sharing and we can collaborate on and we can do good stuff for society. We can do not-for-profit stuff around that kind of data because it's about keeping people out of harm's way. If you tried to
Yeah.
do this in realms of competitive data involving IP and commercial, stuff in organizations, we're years away from that in a collaborative sense because it literally is so difficult for organizations to protect what's theirs. So we have an opportunity in this space to use AI to unlock a lot of what we've maybe historically not been able to see. And the use
Mhm.
cases are varied, Monica. So I call one of my favorite use cases daily intelligence. If you're nosy and you want to see changes and things that may be evolving in your data, it's a great way of going in and using it as your newspaper in many ways. You can use it to satisfy a hunch. You maybe think something's wrong, but you don't know, and you go in there and you have a look. I remember being
Mhm.
involved in a case recently with AI in the rail industry where a small child wearing Croc sandals got the Croc ingested
Ooh.
in the top of an escalator and they lost two toes. And
Oh
immediately
no.
that whole network rail operator was able to go into their data and isolate escalators and look to see if this was something that was maybe occurring or nearly occurring elsewhere. So those
Mhm.
use cases, those hunches can be met much more easily.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's because you're planning to deploy resource over a year and you want to know where best to get the biggest value from that resource. That's really significant. I think that's a really important reason why AI needs to be an important tool within your EHS management toolkit. Sometimes it's because you want to repeat, as Scott said, what's going well. You want to look into that green, and that's great because that has a direct impact on systems like Intellex because those preventive actions that you are responsible for managing the rollout and implementation of, they should be instigating bigger green. And so understanding
Yeah.
of the effectiveness of those actions through using AI led insights is really important
Mhm.
as well. But my one note of caution is us humans, we have to retrain our brains to be the QA. We must be very careful about using AI as a decision-making tool entirely in its own right. It's a strength of signal. Sometimes that strength of signal will be pushing through the roof. It will be so strong, and there'll be very little risk in the decision that you're going to make. But sometimes it'll still be in that area where your human judgment and your human expertise is absolutely critical to making sure you get that right. And I pick on North America a little bit sometimes, but it'll only be a matter of months before there is a huge court case somewhere because
Yep.
Mhm.
someone taken AI in a tool and used it verbatim and not had the outcome they've expected from their $1 million investment that they've made. And we don't
Mhm.
want that to happen in EHS. We want the value of the AI to be understood, but the value of the human alongside the AI to be understood equally well. I hope that sounds fair because I think that's probably where we need to be.
I think it's completely fair. This is one of those areas that I kind of dive into, and I guess I use AI every single day, not just with the platform, Monica, but actually generally thinking about things. Most of the time, I use AI, right? I'm just trying to validate some of my own thoughts around a certain subject, and I'm always amazed that it comes up with those two or three things that I didn't think about, right? Or maybe I should think about, or maybe
Mhm.
something I can disagree about. So for me, it's a challenging exercise to validate what I really want to say or what I want to write. So I think it's good on those. I speak about this a lot. I teach a session at many conferences, and it's one abstract that's been accepted widely is chat hacks for the safety professional. And
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
literally just a session on prompts is how do I write the right prompt to get the information that I want to get. That class fills up. If it's a room full of 500 people will go into that room because they're always very inquisitive about how to use AI much better. And I think that's a good thing. I do like having access to large data sets. I like that ability to do that. So when
Mhm.
I compare it with what we're doing with Intellects, we're certainly using it differently. And I sat on that AI team, and the COE actually does that, and we just watch, right? We sit back, and that team brings forward an idea. We look at it, we vet that idea, and many of them are about 70 to 80% there when we see them, and then they work on that next 20 to 30%, to refine that tool the way that we want to use it. So we're taking it very seriously. Our clients, right, are demanding that we do, and that's a good thing because it makes us better at delivering value. So we're there. We're just waiting to see. I mean, if you were to ask me this question, Mark, 2 years ago, I wouldn't even not have had an answer. And my answers change about every 6 to 12 months. They get a little
I
bit more
think
refined.
I think that's brilliant, brilliant and honest feedback there. For me, there was one thing that came along. So we've been doing AI for about 6.5 years now. In fact, believe it or not, our CIO who retired last week, he was doing AI in 1994 on condition monitoring
Wow.
systems as part of a PhD. But that's a long way back. It was AI, it was
Yeah.
machine learning, but not the AI we recognize today. But the thing that changed it for me, Monica, which I think is a
Hmm.
really important evolution, is reasoning. So
Hmm.
Yep.
good AI now has reasoning engines baked
Hmm.
in, and those reasoning engines allow the AI to tell you how it's come up with the conclusion that it has, and that's
Hmm.
very, very important. It's a
It
bit like
is.
when you did your mathematics exam at school or college. If you wrote 42 was the answer, you got no marks. You had to show your workings, and it's the same principle. How can you trust an AI
I
at the
hated
right
that part
outcome?
too.
Me
Yeah,
too. I was never
exactly.
good at it.
Without the workings are key. So what
Yeah.
really unlocked for me as a
Hmm.
skeptic, because I'm naturally skeptical towards this stuff, was
Right.
when you were able to ask it to tell you how it got there. And I think
Mm.
that made a big difference, because suddenly you're in a
Yeah.
place now where your logic, your brain, the way in
Hmm.
which you've always done it can now be married up to the logic that the AI was using. And then you can be much more comfortable about accepting or not accepting the conclusion. So for me, that's been a big thing, working with
Hmm.
some big AI providers out there to help understand how they did that was a real light bulb moment for me.
No, I agree. I believe you do need to almost fact check it, which is kind of funny because you would want it to fact check you. But you did touch on an important point about evolving. So, if you had to give organizations one piece of advice, what would it be around the risks if they don't evolve their data?
Um, that's one single piece of advice.
If you
You'll
had
be
to.
left, you'll be left behind. You'll be left
Yeah.
behind.
Yeah.
Eventually this stuff is gonna be a left arm to a right arm. It's gonna work in perfect harmony, and we have to find its place and
Hmm.
adopt it. Don't be scared. It will improve with you. It's not a destination. It's a bit like safety. Safety is not a destination. It's a state of mind every day.
Hmm.
3,000 days LTI free just means you might have an LTI on the 3,001st day. AI is the same. It's not a destination. It's a constant evolution, and
Hmm.
don't be left behind. I think for leaders these days, particularly in large, complex operating environments, there is so
Hmm.
much that they can learn about their organizations without putting the human being in harm's way or without working the human being to the bone. I think it's a tool that we have to
Yeah.
harness and adopt and use properly.
Yeah, I think the organizations, when I work with clients of intellects, I can tell very quickly the organizations that are pulling away from their peers in a vertical or across a domain right now are treating quality and health and safety and environmental data as a strategic asset, right? Not some kind of compliance obligation. I would not have said that 10 or 15 years ago, but they are looking at it very strategically and how they push their process and their programs forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this was a really important conversation to be had. And just to close us out, could you give us, both of you, a best case example of what happens when you do everything you guys said? Do you have any success stories to share?
Yeah, there's lots of use cases and success stories. Um, they happen because of a number of things, though. They happen because the AI is carefully set up and configured to deliver the use cases the organization is looking to achieve. The organization is smart about how it collects data. That's a
Mhm.
really important part of that journey as well. And Intellects, again, has a big, big role to play in that, because the way in which reporting data is gathered, the way in which questions are asked, the way in which natural language is accumulated, the way in which the technical diversity in the data is enhanced, that's all AI's friend. So the use cases that are the best ones, and we can certainly put our hands on many now, because it's been a number of years, are always because they've been considered and carefully built from the bottom up. The ones that haven't been successful in our world have been the ones where data has been thrown over the fence with an expectation that the miracle of AI will just catch it and make sense of it. I think there's that it's becoming easier now to ingest more generic data sets without a whole lot of configuration done in them. But that's been because a lot of clever work's been done over the years to make sure that we're ingesting and understanding data properly before we turn on the AI analytics. Industry wise, aviation, construction, oil and gas, rail, waste and water, broader utilities, lots of stories where either the lenses are used to improve safety insights or potentially environmental or customer service insights or potentially quality insights as well, where they're looking to reduce non-conformance rates. But yeah, when you get it right and when you follow the steps that are required to build the right starting gate, if you like, then you've got every chance you'll get a very quick return on investment.
And as a practitioner, I would say this: people are going home safe and healthy every single day.
Yep.
We are protecting the environment that we are in charge to steward, and quality is delivering on its promises. I think that's it. If we can use technology to do that, we can use data to do that. I'm one happy practitioner.
Well put.
Agreed. That is why we do what we do. And I say it over and over. Our job is to send everyone home to their loved ones at the end of the day. And data is your friend, and so is AI if you use it correctly and don't abuse it to make your grocery list like I do. But I think the main takeaway for me, and people could agree, is that even with all this data, the real value only comes when organizations actually learn from it. So that's a great segue into the next episode that we're going to be having with Comet, which we're going to be digging into what happens after the data. So how organizations investigate incidents, we uncover the root causes, and what actually turns those insights into meaningful change. Scott, do you want to send us home? Any final words?
Well, it's always good, and it's great to be with my friend Mark as we kind of end this, and of course with you, Monika, that I get a chance to work with every single day. So thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to the next one.
Yes. Thank you, Mark, so much. It was such a great conversation. I'm sure the listeners are going to agree as well. And any final words from you?
No, thank you both, Scott. It is absolutely always a pleasure to share a room or a virtual room with you. Your passion and your commitment to the cause certainly hasn't diminished despite all those years of experience. I think these things are great. You know, and there's something very powerful about just sitting down and having a chat. And I think that's really fantastic. So, Monika, thank you for organizing and for chairing a really, really enjoyable conversation.
Thank you back. And just to call out, it has been many years for Scott, if you guys weren't aware.
A lot.
I'm just kidding. All right, Mark, Scott, thank you both so much. And stay tuned for the next episode.
Take care. Thanks, folks.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Guys.